Hello, and welcome to Sinful Art Fantasy Fridays. I'm your host, Cynthia, and we are reading The Hobbit Chapter 1. And suddenly the first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes, and this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break the day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollows beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought and light they caught, to hide in gems and hilt of sword. On silver necklace they strung, the flowering stars on the crowns they hung, the dragon fire in twisted wire, they meshed the light of the moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There lay they long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, its flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and the men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ear, more fierce than fire, lay low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, and dwarves they heard the trampled of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit fell in love of the beautiful things made by the hands, and the cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of jewels and dwarves shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water a flame leapt up, possibly somebody's lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than a half a mind to pretend to go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he had found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of Hobbit's mind. "What about a little late?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are not together in this house of our friend and fellow conspirator. This is most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out, and all praise to his wine and ale." He paused for a breath, for a polite remark from the hobbit. But the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out. He was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policies, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which Some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our objective is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps one or two of the younger dwarves, I think I should be right in naming Killian Philly, for instance, the exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was Thorn's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone out there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. It may never return, and he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up. Knocking over the table, Gandalf struck a blue light in the end of his magic staff, and its fireworks glare the poor little hobbit could be seen, kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the dwarving room sofa with a drink in his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. Excitable little fellow, said Gandalf, as they sat down again. Gets funnier, queer fits, but he is on one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'll realize that this was the only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit. Even to old Took's great-granduncle Bororder, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of Greenfields and knocked their king Gumbafool's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Boror's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing-room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard Gawain speak. "Humph!" or something, snort more or less like that. "Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives, and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement, and in fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar." Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for the little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many times afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you were talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing," this is what he called being on his dignity, "that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great-great-great-granduncle once, or Roderer, Took, and—" Yes, but that was long ago," said Golan. Please join us next week for more of The Hobbit. If you would like to show support for my YouTube channel, go check out my sinfularts.ca website, or go check out my Ko-fi page to make a donation. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next week for more of The Hobbit.